So welcome to the Diocese of Washington School for Christian Faith and Leadership's Vestry Training with the Reverend Dr. Frank Wade and Canon Andrew Walter.
And good morning to all of you. And let me begin by thanking you for the gift that you are giving to the church this morning. It's a slice out of your Saturday, and you know that is a real gift. And I'm very appreciative, and I want you to know that what you're doing is acknowledged, and we're aware of it. Even though it's a lousy day outside, it's still your day, and you've given some of it to this. And so we'll try to make this worthwhile. We'll try to make it something that's worth doing, and we'll press on and do it. Let me tell you how we're going to do this today, how this will work. I want to begin by setting the context for our ministries as vestry members. What are churches for? What are they supposed to do? It's really hard to be a leader in an organization if you don't know what the organization does. So that seems to be a pretty basic and important thing to get a hold of. Then we're going to take a look at the specific results that we seek. What's supposed to happen in the church? What's supposed to happen when we do a good job as being vestry members? It's hard to plan or to budget and to do the things that vestries do if you don't know what the result is supposed to be on the other side. So we look at that. And then we'll take a look at what vestries do to achieve those objectives. What role does a vestry have specifically within that context? It's really hard to serve on a vestry or anybody if you don't know what that body is supposed to be doing, what its role is. Then, as Jennifer said, we'll have some discussion questions. They are on the back page of the workbook, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But you can choose what question you deal with and how you deal with it. And we'll take a look at that and then come back for a Q&A session with Canon Walter and myself. And that's how we'll spend the morning. So thank you all for being here and for making this gift to the church and what we're doing. So let's begin. What do churches do? What do they do? Well, a lot of people will say, and rightly say, that the church is a blessing, something given us by God. And we focus on God giving us a blessing. And when we do that, we immediately get into some dangerous ground, some soft ground, where we can make a subtle but very basic and very tragic mistake. The fact is, the church is not the blessing. Not St. Albans Church that I used to serve, or the churches that I served before that. The church that you represent, St. whoever it is, that's not the blessing. That's not the point. The church contains the blessing. The blessing is given to us. The church that you look at, St. John's or whoever, is the container for the blessing. It contains the blessing, and we who are the leaders in that church have the responsibility of curating the blessing, Now, let's slow down a minute and take a look at that word. The word curate as a noun in church talk refers to an assisting clergy person. So you might have a rector and a curate. That's one thing. But as a verb, to curate means to be in charge of selecting, arranging, and presenting material. That's what churches do. God has given us a blessing, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, what that is. God has given us a blessing, and we have the responsibility of arranging and presenting that material to the world. The material that we curate is the blessing that God has placed in our care. Be aware, the church is not the blessing. The church has a responsibility, a function, and it is to care for, to curate the blessing. So, what's the blessing? What is it that God gave to us? If it's not the parish, if it's not dear old Saint somebody or other, what is the blessing? Make note. It is 4,000 years. 4,000 years of revelation and experience. What God has placed in our care is a treasure chest of stories and symbols, signs, sacraments, music, teaching, traditions, insights, and examples. Now, of course, everybody has access to them, but we have the unique responsibility to care for them, to curate them, so that people can find them when they need them. In that regard, we are sort of like libraries or endowments or charitable trusts. We are holding assets for the benefit of others. We curate them. We arrange and present the treasures of that 4,000 years of history so that we and others can benefit from them. To touch just so briefly on what that means, we have part of our treasure is the creation stories in the Bible. The creation stories hold out the importance of human responsibility for ourselves, for each other, and for the earth. And I would suggest if you picked up the Washington Post this morning and ran through it, you would find that 90% of the stories and the issues and the things that they worry about are about human responsibility for ourselves, for each other, and for the earth. It's very basic to what's going on. It's a valuable thing. As the story goes on, we also have the story of the patriarchs, and we have the story of Abraham, for example. God says to Abraham, "Come with me to a land I will show you." And that tells us two things. One of them everybody knows, the other one hardly anybody knows. God says to Abraham, "Come with me to a land I will show you." And that means that life is a journey. It's a thing that we travel. But then he says, "I will show you." Lots of people know that life is a journey. Not many people know that God is leading the way, that we can follow God on that journey. Then you get to Moses and the 10 Commandments. Those are lessons that people learned on life's journey. They learned that as they went along. And that means that you and I don't have to make it up as we go along. We don't have to make all the mistakes on our own. Other people have made the mistakes and they've discovered some things. And then for us as vestry leaders and as church leaders, there's a writing of St. Paul who's working out what it means to be faithful in congregations in real time and real situations. That's our stuff. That's what we do. And it's all right there for us. In addition to those biblical stories, we are given a host of mentors and martyrs and examples, good examples, bad examples, in-between examples, all of them there to show us how life is meant to be lived. And in addition to that, we have the sacraments. We have the signs. We have the symbols that are all rooted in mystery, opening our eyes and our hearts to that which is beyond us, giving us a glimpse in one way to what precedes birth and what follows death. And what makes that important, if you take that, what precedes birth is the ultimate source of purpose in life. And what follows death is the ultimate source of hope in life. And there are people literally dying because they've lost track of purpose and hope. There are people close to your church, people you could probably name, who are literally dying because they don't know purpose and they don't know hope. And it's in our treasure chest. And all of that treasure is summed up in the life and teaching of Jesus, culminating in the life-encompassing resurrection of the Christ. Now, we are the curators of that mixed bag of stories and symbols, signs, sacraments, music, teaching, traditions, insights, examples. And each congregation has its own way of doing that, its own method, its own priorities in selecting and arranging and presenting that treasure. But remember, that's what the buildings are for. That's what the budget is about. That's the reason we hired clergy. It's the reason we have choirs and acolytes and altar guilds and youth groups and prayer groups and outreach and parish suppers. All of them are ways of presenting and sharing the treasure with which God has blessed us. When we forget that, when we forget what we're supposed to be doing, the church begins to divagate. Now, here's a treat for you. I mean, everybody, I think, who comes out on a Saturday morning and gives something today, you ought to have some snob word that you've just learned that you can go back and tell your friends and your family that you've been talking about divagating all day, and you just, amaze your friends and startle your enemies, and you'll just impress people to death. But If the church forgets what we're about, we start to divagate. Now, divagate is a 16th century word that means to lose track, to wander. It's the opposite of navigate. You may, as you take your role as a vestry member, find out that your church has been divagating for a long time. It's time to start navigating, to fix what we want to do and to go on and do it. So now you have your rewards. You have a snob word to take and dazzle your families with. You can say you talked about divagating this morning. Well, okay, so we do that. We curate those blessings, and something is supposed to happen. Something is supposed to happen because we've set these revelations out in a certain way. And there I want to talk to you about blessing in a particular way. Blessing as an investment. Now, we don't normally think about blessings that way. We think, oh, I'm blessed. That we treat it like good luck. Oh, that's nice. That happened. I'm, good for me. And you go on and you're just happy about it. That's not what this says. This is that a blessing given to you, me, us, our church, is an investment by God, an investment in which God expects some return. Now, in the workbook, there's the passage from the 12th chapter of Mark. It's a parable that Jesus told, and it illustrates this fact about a blessing as an investment. And it says that there was a man who planted a vineyard. Now, that the man is supposed to be God, the vineyard is supposed to be Israel or the church or all that sort of thing. And he took care of it, set it all up for people, and the people go in there. And then the important thing is that then the giver, God, says, hey, it's time I got some return on this investment. And he starts to send people over there and say, let me have you're supposed to be giving some to me. This is my investment. I want some return. And of course, they don't do it. The parable goes on and picks up other threads, which we're not going to go into this morning. The important thing is that God expects a return on the blessing given to these people. And when he doesn't get it, he takes it pretty seriously. He takes it pretty seriously. He says, if y'all are going to do that, if you're not going to return and do what I want you to do with this investment and give me some return on this investment, I'm going to give it to somebody else. And that should haunt us as a church. That should haunt us as a church. Creating and sustaining an environment where something can happen, that's the responsibility of vestries and church leaders. We have the blessings, we present them in a certain way, and something is supposed to happen. Well, okay, what's supposed to happen? What's supposed to happen? If we present them in the right way to the people that we have in our lives, what's supposed to happen? Well, churches form and maintain a community around the treasures in such a way that allows the people to experience the living God. To experience the living God. That's what's supposed to happen. When we take the treasure that God has given us, 4,000 years of tradition and revelation and experience, and present it properly, the people who come in touch with that treasure should experience the living God. Now, you might think, well, wait a minute. I didn't sign on for anything like that. That's a lot of hocus pocus. And, you talk about experiencing the living God. For most of us, what comes into mind are, Hollywood presentations of Charlton Heston banging on the Red Sea and the whole thing party. That's not what we're talking about. Or you might think about Renaissance paintings where people are always falling all over themselves with emotion and all this drama. It's not about drama. It's not about drama. What it means, now here, mark this well. Experience the living God means recognizing and responding to God in nature. Human nature, the world around us, history, and day-to-day living. Put a mark on that. If we do our job right, curating the blessings that God has given us, the people who gather around those blessings will recognize and respond to God in nature, which means human nature and the world around us and history and day-to-day living. It means an awareness of God that affects and ultimately determines our behavior. It means a faith based on knowing God in the ordinary and not just the extraordinary. It's not talking about going out and parting the Potomac River for some reason. It's not talking about some dramatic thing coming down from heaven and scaring the socks off of everybody in the room. We're talking about recognizing God in the ordinary. And it works this way. For centuries, we have experienced and known that the energy of God touches people. The energy of God touches people. That's the heart of faith story. In this faith tradition, one can be touched by God. And it happens so often that it's seldom noticed or even named. For example, it is God's energy touching us that we experience when our conscience is pricked, when our conscience is touched. When you feel a nudge to do the right thing, to pause, to respond, to help, that's God. That is an experience of the living God. There's nothing new about that except to know that it is an experience of the living God. The push, the nudge, the tug to step out beyond ourselves and beyond our self-interest is an act of God. That which motivates us to do the right thing, that's the energy of God touching us. Doing the right thing is the literal meaning of the word righteousness. And when we're called to righteousness, whether it's because somebody is holding a cup out in front of us and asking for money, or because somebody is asking for time or for forgiveness or understanding or whatever, that nudge is God. And we see it when kindness is sown. We see it when generosity is expressed. We see it when understanding is sought. St. Paul said that moments like that are what he called the fruits of the Spirit. The fruits of the Spirit. And this is in the 5th chapter of Galatians. And he said, the fruits of the Spirit are these: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Church worship and church life are meant to bring people and God together close enough for God's energy to touch people so that it influences and even determines how we live and how we treat each other. Now, that's not something pious thing that's hanging over, some theological hocus pocus. You see that a lot. The point is to know that it's what's supposed to happen when God's energy touches up people's lives, and God's energy is supposed to touch people's lives by the way that we present the treasure of blessing and revelation that God has given us. That's the return on investment that God expects. Now, if that feels heavy, if that feels like a great responsibility, how in the world can I get the people in my church to experience the living God in this way? Take a break. We don't have to make it happen. That's not the vestry's role. To use another analogy in this regard, the church is like a hospital. Hospitals do not heal people. Hospitals set up the optimum circumstances so that healing can happen. That's what hospitals do. Church leaders do not make the connection between God and people. We set up the optimum, the best circumstances for that to happen, for that encounter with the living God to take place. That's the return that God expects from us, to set up the circumstances where God's energy can touch people in such a way that the fruits of the Spirit blossom and ripen and enrich us all. So, how do you do that? How do you do that? Well, back on what we said before, church leaders curate the blessings that God's given into our hand. We select them, arrange them, and present them for our congregation and community so that people can experience the living God in a way that affects and determines their behavior. Now that is what budget categories are for. When you allocate money for liturgy or music or education or outreach, for spiritual development and social groups, that's what's supposed to happen because you put the money there. That's what a pledge campaign is supposed to enable. That's what buildings are supposed to help happen. That's what long-range plans are about. That's what endowments are meant to enable and support. Now, the clergy have a particular role in that. This is not their conference, so I'm not going to spend much time on that, but clergy are meant to care for the treasures. That's their responsibility according to the canons. Clergy are put in charge of worship and the use of buildings, and they're given this marvelous phrase, spiritual jurisdiction. Now, I can't imagine anybody who could define that, but sort of like pornography, everybody would know it when they see it. They're responsible for the spiritual life of the community, which means managing the system so that people can recognize and experience the living God. It's the clergy's job to manage the worship, education, proclamation, pastoral care, so that people experience the living God. Forget about clergy. They're not here today, except for Rob, who I saw a little earlier, but everybody else. Vestries have a specific role. We are to help set the stage for the encounters with the living God, to set the stage, to provide the optimum circumstances so that people are in fact being pricked, nudged, and pushed out of themselves and towards righteousness, towards doing the right thing. In concert with the rector, we are to establish desirable outcomes to bring about those optimum circumstances. What do we have to do in order to make that happen in our church? What are our plans? How do we plan? That's what we do. Like a hospital has to say, what do we have to do to be, the place where healing can happen? We provide funds and maintain property to support those outcomes. That's in the canons. And we work with the rector in developing them. And then, that's pretty clear. I think most people know that. But there is also a soft side to the vestry responsibility. And that is that we are custodians of trust. Custodians of trust. Clergy and vestries have responsibility, have authority by canon and by custom. And authority in the church dies without trust. Building trust is absolutely essential in a volunteer system. Churches are volunteer systems. You know that. People who don't want to be there don't come. That everybody who comes is a volunteer. And it runs on trust. If there's not trust within that system, then the system dies. It simply dies. Vestry leaders are perfectly positioned to develop, nurture, and model trust and respect, without which the church dies. So the vestry needs to be a mini church, one that by its life together, by the way in which it works together, shows the trust and shows the cooperation and the life that is developed that you want developed in the whole country, the whole congregation. Congregations run on trust. It says in the canons that vestries are responsible for the relationships of the clergy of the parish to its clergy. And that's true. And you also have responsibilities about the relationship of the parishioners with one another. And the church runs on volunteers. You know that. You're a volunteer as a vestry member. So the church runs on volunteers. And one of the myths that we have there, and this is the thing to watch for, one of the myths that we have is that volunteers don't get paid. Well, that's not true. They get paid in satisfaction. They get paid in satisfaction. And if they're not being satisfied in what they do, then they'll quit. The same way that somebody who works for a salary, if they don't get paid, they'll quit. And volunteers will quit if they don't achieve satisfaction. And that points out that for vestry members, you have enormous powers of appreciation. There's somebody in your church who is teaching not now because of the COVID, but later on will be teaching the 4th grade Sunday school class. Those 4th graders haven't got a clue about telling this person they're doing a good job. But you can. You're the one who can tell them that they're doing a good job, that you appreciate what they're doing. Volunteers are paid in satisfaction. You have enormous power to do that. You have a lot of respect. You've been elected. They chose you. You're a leader. You have power to convey that, to really, literally pay the volunteers. Church is also never static. It's always expanding or shrinking. It's growing or it's dying. And that has to do with the role of developing new leaders. In the pamphlet that is in the toolbox that Jennifer sent out to everybody, there's an understanding of the role of vestry members from the Episcopal Church Foundation. And it talks about the importance of developing new leaders. That's part of your responsibility too. Now, when we do this, when satisfaction is given to the volunteers, when trust is developed and maintained at a high level, it will be manifest by what Paul called the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. When it is not, when the volunteers are not satisfied, when the trust is not there, when new people are not being brought in, the situation will be manifest by what St. Paul, in the same passage in Galatians, calls the works of the flesh, what you and I would probably call the works of the ego. And those fruits are enmities, strife, jealousy, anger, quarrels, dissensions, factions, envy. The fruits of the Spirit are not works of ego. The fruits of the Spirit, not works of ego, are what God expects in return for the blessing he's placed in your hands. So, in summary, the church, your congregation, is blessed with a great treasure. Your church is not the treasure, but it is the custodian of 4,000 years of revelation and experience. And we are meant to curate it, to present it to the world around us. And something is supposed to happen because of the way we present that treasure. And what's supposed to happen is an experience of the living God that ultimately determines our behavior. The specific vestry role is to set the stage, provide the resources, and serve as leaders in the congregation so that the fruits of the Spirit are born. It is an important task before you, my friends. So what we're going to do now is start by talking about it specifically in terms of your congregation. And I'm going to stop there, and that we have, I'm going to turn to Rowan, who knows everything that's ever been thought about breakout rooms. And there are questions. There are 4 questions, but notice that each question has as an addendum to it the question, what helps or hinders you in addressing these issues in your congregation?
So welcome back, everyone, from your small groups. We hope that you found that to be a rich and rewarding time with your vestry or also with other vestries. We invite you to pose a question or an issue that your vestry or your group engaged with that you would like the Reverend Dr. Frank Wade or Canon Andrew Walter to address. Please do that so by putting Q and a question in the chat area, and then we will call on you and ask you to unmute so that you can put that question or issue in your own words. Okay, so we already have a question here in the chat by Lauren Kingsland. I wonder if you might, I would invite you to unmute yourself and pose that question. Lauren?
Oh, hello. I've unmuted myself. Hi. Our conversation included a lot of discussion about ways we shared these treasures before COVID and how the impact of the pandemic has changed how we're presenting these things to the world now. And so I would ask for suggestions, thoughts about how we can navigate the new world that's ahead of us, to share in yet another way when maybe we can be together in person, maybe we still have to be together virtually. It's a whole new paradigm. So thoughts, suggestions, how are other people doing it?
That's a good point, Lauren. And it's a point that, am I unmuted? Am I live here? Okay, good.
Yeah, I can hear you.
It's certainly, a presenting issue for us at this point. Two things come to my mind. Well, three. The first is that I don't know any more about it than you do. Okay, but I'm a preacher, and not knowing what I'm talking about has never slowed me down at all. So I'll keep going. But there is a good bit of conversation going on in the church under the title of hybrid church. And so, trying to pick up on that conversation, learn what people are saying. Hybrid refers to a combination of live church and Zoom church, or whatever, YouTube, whatever form it takes, and what it means to be a hybrid church. And there's a lot of, such a good question. A lot of people are looking at it and doing it. The second point I would make is that because nobody's ever been here before, that the question cannot be addressed once. That if your vestry got together and said, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to have church and Zoom church and whatever construct you decide to do, that when you make a decision like that, you put a marker down, and 3 or 4 months down the road, ask it again. Because we've never been here before. Nobody knows the answer. So to assume, all right, well, we check that box, and now we'll go on and plan the bazaar or something. It's not, it's something to keep checking on. And I think that, that like the promise to Abraham, come with me to a land I will show you. I think God is going to show us. I think that there is an unfolding, but we're followers, and we call ourselves followers of Jesus Christ, partly because we don't know where we're going. And if you know where you're going, you don't have to follow anybody. So the thing is that we are followers of Jesus Christ, because there's an element of, I don't know what we're doing, and everybody's got it. But look under hybrid church and make the decision, re-examine the decisions at regular intervals. Andrew, do you want to speak to that at all?
No, I think that's right, Frank. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Walter. I serve the Diocese of Washington as canon to the Ordinary and Chief Operating Officer. I think Frank makes some wonderful points there. I think this is because we don't know what the future will look like. We will need to continually assess. But I would suggest that the vestry might do that assessment by asking some very important strategic questions, like, what have you learned during this time of virtual church that you might like to continue? Is there something from the way prior to the pandemic that you did church that maybe you want to leave behind? And so I think asking strategic questions like that, and as Frank said, sort of continually reassessing, would be a good way to move forward.
And another is, y'all can learn from one another. That what's done in church X, could well be shared and learned in church Y. And I think that, quite often, I'm still a member of the Diocese of Washington, but I live in Alexandria, Virginia now. But quite often the church organizes itself geographically, but most of the shared ministry is demographically. That churches are the same size and that sort of thing. So look to your brothers and sisters demographically, not just geographically, but demographically, and see what they're doing and learn from one another. We are a community. We're in this together. It's a good question, Lauren. Thank you very much.
Yeah, excellent question. If I can chime in quickly here, we've been in a period of, sometimes we face technical challenges and sometimes we face adaptive challenges. And adaptive challenges are those challenges that we don't know the solution to. We don't know necessarily where we're going. Technical challenges are those like, I need to call my daughter. I go get my phone. I know how to do that. I dial. I might do it differently than I did 30 years ago, but I still know how to do that. So we're in this period of adaptive challenges where we don't know where we're going. And I wanted just to put a plug in here for the Tending Our Soil initiative for the Diocese of Washington, because the Tending Our Soil initiative is specifically designed to help congregations meet adaptive challenges. And Dr. Wade has identified a core principle of that, tending our soil, which is we learn better when we learn together. And so congregations will be in cohorts of learning cohorts, and we will be addressing issues such as hybrid discipleship, hybrid worship, and it's edow.org/tending to learn more. So thank you. Excellent question. We have another question here by Christine, if I pronounce your name and last name correct, Bloecker, Christine Bloecker, if you could unmute yourself and pose your question, please.
And thank you. So my question is, how would you suggest in a virtual world, the many committees of a church stay consistently connected and in communication with the vestry?
So would you repeat that, please, Christine?
So in a virtual format, how would you suggest the many committees of a church stay consistently connected and in communication with the vestry?
I think, again, we're moving into a world we don't know. So it's a question of adjusting around that. I would say that that a lot of that initiative for such contact needs to come from the vestry, because the vestry has the vested interest in knowing what the altar guild's doing or whatever, and so I think that the vestry probably needs to be more proactive, to stay in touch with that for two reasons. One is that a committee that's working on an issue or a set of issues or opportunities or whatever they've got is not necessarily going to say, oh gee, we really ought to share this with the vestry, because that's not their problem. It's the vestry's concern. So I think the vestry has some responsibility in making that contact and to seeing that happens. The other is that when we talk about in this virtual world that we're in, like right here, in many ways it's actually easier to get in touch with people that virtually than it is physically. And I mean, there's something lost, clearly. I mean, there is really something to the value of being in touch with somebody, and we're just on screens. But it is, in many ways, it is easier. For example, I don't know that if we had said, would all of you all come to Church House or to the cathedral or something to do this conference, I'm not sure you'd have gotten 120 people. It's in many ways it's easier to do this. So I think the vestry's that's a vestry issue, because they're the ones that want to know, and they may find that it's in fact easier. Does that speak to your question? Does it?
That does. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We got another one?
Oh, yes, we do. Sure. Lisa Ahuja has a question about vestries and connecting the fiduciary responsibilities with being curators of the blessings. Lisa, would you please unmute yourself and present your question?
Sure. Hi, Frank. Any words of wisdom for us and for our vestries when connecting our fiduciary responsibilities to this idea of being the curators of blessings?
I think that the fiduciary responsibility of the vestry is part of the curation. I mean, where do you put your money? And if I know from a lot of experience, my own included, that quite often the assets of the parish are arranged to take care of the squeaky wheels, the things that's making the most noise or that kind of stuff. And that's not a very effective way to do it. I think that by having the larger issue in mind, how are we sharing? mine was being touched by the living God, being experiencing the living God. I think that that's a good question for for the finance committee to have, and the budget committee and all that, and of course the people that I know in my own life and ministry, that the people that you ask to be on the finance committee are not necessarily given to philosophical, I mean, they're sort of the number crunchers and the green eye shade sorts of people, which are very vital to have and very important. So I would say that making sure that those who exercise fiduciary responsibility have their eye on the big picture, rather than just saying, well, we got to do this, or somebody's going to complain, or that kind of stuff. So I think that having the big picture does guide the fiduciary issue.
If I could just chime in a little bit on that one,
Yeah,
Frank. I think Frank is exactly right there. And I would just emphasize the point as the vestry is to be good stewards for these blessings, including the financial blessings of a parish, that having adequate financial controls, conducting an audit, all of those sort of financial best practices are being done, so that the entire community has faith and trust that the vestry is being a good steward of the blessings.
Good point. Good point.
And we had a treasure training a few weeks ago. And then a follow-up to that is that the School for Christian Faith and Leadership will be developing a very short course that will both video-based and additional resources for every congregation, specifically for the Diocese of Washington. We hope to have that out in the next few months. These are excellent questions. Let's see. Here's one that comes up I see a lot. Alex Deem, if you would like to please ask your question.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. My question is about increasing families and youth presence within the church. Where I am down at Christ Church Wayside, my little family of 3 brings down the age median significantly. And so I am interested in bringing in more families. They're definitely in our area, but with the lack of foot traffic events, with quarterly dinners and volunteer events, how do we reach out more and increase the foot traffic into our church, whatever it looks like right now?
That's these are all excellent questions. And obviously, when asking people to come to church when you're not having church is, has a sort of a blunt sword that you're carrying around with you. So not much there. So I think that, that's a problem. And I think that that's going to ease at some point, and that you're talking about a longer range position, so that if we are a gathered community. Our faith has always been a community faith. That's one of the things in our 4,000 years is it's a community faith. So the community has to connect. I think that one of the there are a couple of things when we talk about asking people to join us. The first is to make sure that it's worthwhile. Why would anybody want to come? Saying that, a lot of churches say, well, we're a really nice bunch of people and we do good things in the community. Well, that's nice, but that's really a Rotary Club with incense. They're nice people and they do good things in the community. I mean, so you're not talking about anything. So there's an essential value added here. And what I was talking about, trying to touch on with the idea of an experience of the living God, that's what goes on, and that's really what we have to market. That's what's unique about what we have to offer. And so I think the first thing is to make sure that we have it to offer. That's a thing that would be a reasonable expectation if one were to connect to this church. And the other is that connection is best made one-to-one. They're putting an ad in the paper, fine, but the people who come one-to-one. So helping the people who are there now to be articulate about what they're experiencing and what their value added is, and to learn the language of that so that they can say it. That's part of the key. Whether you're talking about a hybrid church, a Zoom church, a YouTube church, or a church that sits down in the pew, those steps are essential. So I would say, make sure that your church is a place worth coming to. Make sure that the people who are there know what they're getting and have words for it, and they're doing it. And then like that, for this Zoom period, I think that it's really important that for Zoom churches, that use that for, just not to try and cover everything. I think it's really important for Zoom churches to have more smaller groups, to have groups that get together by Zoom, for conversations about, scripture, about prayer, about, all the little things that that we come together for. I think it's really important to do that and do more of it, because we're not gathering so much in the larger group. So I think that that's a piece that can be done. They can do that tomorrow. Say get 2 or 3 people in the church and say, look, let's get together and talk about Lent, or the book of Elijah or Ezekiel, or whatever you want to do. I mean, but something like that. But that's what does that respond to your point, Alex?
Yes, it does. I like the make it worth coming to, right? That's a good, Rotary Club with incense. Those are nice little nuggets.
One of the things we've had for years, since the 1960s, the statistic we call ASA, average Sunday attendance, has been going down pretty steadily in mainline churches, not just us, but mainline churches. And church leaders have agonized and flagellated themselves on the cathedral steps and everything else to figure out why is that happening. And the one piece that they never mention is boredom. You go to churches, it's bloody boring. They're not saying anything. So that's manageable. We can do something about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Dingle from St. George's has a question. Tim, if you'd like to invite you to unmute yourself.
We were talking about section of question 3 and the relationship between the congregation and the clergy. We only have one clergy. It's very small.
Okay.
But we have a lot of other people to really support our worship. We have a deacon who's regularly attending and participating, and we have other members, especially since we've gone virtual. What suggestions do you have for us to show our appreciation for them? We've written letters, we've thanked them in person. We're in good shape financially, but there's no way that we're going to afford a salary or create a position at this time.
Well, I think if you are, if you've written notes, and that's a really important piece of it.
Yeah.
And I would like to suggest, and I don't know what y'all are doing at St. George's. I'm sure it's exemplary, but if you took the kind of the means of communication of text, email, and snail mail, as being 3 categories of speaking to people, they increase in value as you go through that. Getting a text that says you did a nice job is not as good as getting an email that says you're doing a nice job, which is not as good as finding a card in your mailbox that says you're doing a good job. So that's a good thing. And it's also possible that you can kind of see that these people know that, and they don't need to be continually reminded, because that can become embarrassing after a while. And so if they're participating and you've conveyed that appreciation to them, fine. So I think it's really important to do. You can't do it financially, my guess is, I don't know St. George as well, but my guess is that one does not volunteer there expecting to be added to a paid staff. That's reasonably, logical, assumption that showing appreciation, expressing appreciation, pass them on the street, whatever. But to do that, but you don't have to do it all the time. It's so I obviously don't know what you've done, but what you described, it sounds like a pretty effective system to me.
In fact, our rector regularly sends out communication to the vestry with a list of names, and she said, "Would you write a note to these people?"
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've been doing that.
That's the power of appreciation, and that's really, really important. That you've got that. You get a letter from the rector, you think, well, that's what that person gets paid to do. But from the vestry, really, really important. Really important. It's good stuff. Sounds like y'all are doing a good job. So
Thank you. Rob Fisher has a question about the vestry's role in management for this versus the staff's role in management. Rob, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Well, you said it. That I think is a fine line, figuring out, where the appropriate way is for a vestry to be involved in management versus what the professionals, the staff, people are doing. And also, I guess you could expand it to other lay leaders. And I realize this isn't one size fits all. It changes a lot depending on the size of a congregation.
it does. It does. And when you're talking about management of, I think of a kind of a rule of thumb, not, and it's very flexible, and it's made of dust on a windy day. I mean, it's not something that you're going to rely on forever. But I think that basically the rector and the vestry agree on what you want to have happen in the church in the coming whatever period of time, and that's a key thing. That what do we want to do? What do we want to affect here? What are we going to keep? What are we going to change? All that kind of stuff. What do we want? And that then after that's done, the clergy have the responsibility of managing that, and the vestry has the responsibility of resourcing that. You need to stay in touch with one another, but I don't think that the vestry, has an official role, a decision-making role in terms of staff management. I think that's the rector's job. Now, if you think, well, this rector's doing a lousy job for whatever reason, fine. I mean, that's its own issue. But the primary relationship is between the rector and the vestry in terms of establishing the outcomes that you're seeking. Once you've done that, those responsibilities divide basically, and the vestry is in charge of resourcing it, and the clergy are in charge of managing it. And so, I don't see the vestry having a lot of formal connection in that context to the management of the staff. And I think that management is a clergy issue. Obviously, if it begins to screw up the system, that you can't, we're not going to make the goal because everybody's mad or whatever, then when we ought to talk about that. But to me, it's a clarifying thing with that division. But again, it's a matter of conversation and whatnot. And I think that if the church, if the rector and vestry got down to the point of saying, well, canonically, this is my responsibility and that's your responsibility, so let's not talk about it anymore. You're a rector, I was a rector for a long time. You might as well start throwing things in a suitcase because you're done in that church. If that's where you're making, if that's where the decisions are, you've lost the trust and the things that make a voluntary system go. So I'm not suggesting, a fixed stuff, but in my mind, that's how it works. Does that speak to your question or your point?
Yeah, no, that's actually really helpful to have that framework set out. I've been in churches where a lot of what we were able to achieve was done out of managing volunteers. And we actually tried to banish the word volunteer. We always said minister, because if you're volunteering in a church, you're doing ministry. And
Yeah, right.
but managing volunteers is different from managing staff. And in a smaller church, a lot of the vestry members, a lot of the energetic and gifted lay ministers in the church, and a lot got done by those people. So there was some overlap,
Right.
in what was happening by that.
Yeah, it is not, you talk about church. In order to talk about church, you have to treat it as if it's something it actually isn't. You have to treat it like it's a jigsaw puzzle with it, locked systems that only interlocked in a certain way. That's never true. It's always fluid and dynamic, and the volunteers are paid in satisfaction, but the staff want satisfaction too, and that's it. So it's always fluid, and that's that's why God calls good people to run it. It's a complex system. So
Great, thank you. Joseph Alcock has a follow-up actually question to Rob Fisher, so I'd like to invite you to unmute yourself and ask your follow-up question.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's kind of interesting that a clergy person, like, I just saw Rob's name in here, and I've got kind of the question on the other side as a vestry member, especially with some of the bigger congregations in the terms of activities. I don't want to say parish size and, but bigger size that have clearly, in my perspective, not clearly non-church related activities. What is the role of the vestry in kind of managing those compared to the rector? Like, what do you think is the right approach? Because there's one thing of like, this is clearly not what I want. As a vestry member, I don't want my rector focused on non-church related activities. But how do you strike that blend of having vestry oversight, but giving the rector the ability to manage staff accordingly?
Okay, let me make sure that I've got the question. So
yeah,
it's a question of the vestry role in managing staff, but also you talked about being involved outside of the parish. I'm not sure that I heard the connection.
So with the rich history that we've got as a parish, you've got assets that have come along the way that people have donated land, all that, and it becomes almost an operation unto itself. And how can a vestry manage, it's easy because it's easy to lose sight of the ultimate goal that we're trying to accomplish here. And so how can a vestry help influence, or maybe even lead for that matter, the right divisions between, here's what we are doing as a parish, kind of with what you led as the opening of curating, these gifts. But then when you've got something so big that can be a life unto itself, how do you draw clear, like, policies and bylaws? And maybe this is a vestry 2.0 meeting, but yeah. Like, what's clear, I would want to say policies to help the decision-making in a parish, so that there are clear lines and clear responsibilities of, hey, this is the rector's responsibility, this is the vestry's, and here's kind of these employees would report to the vestry or not, or Yeah,
I think that you're talking about a particular set of circumstances that
probably, yeah,
they have access to. So let me kind of try to respond to that generally as well as I can.
Yeah.
And one is that conversations like that should be done when the situation is soft. That is, when it's out in front of you and it can actually be molded. That you could think, well, it ought to be this way, it ought to be that way, whatever. It's a difference between proactive and reactive leadership.
Yeah.
Reactive leadership is problem solving. Proactive leadership is planning. And so you want to do as much as you can proactively, out where you can think those things through and seek the desired income or outcomes rather. If you're waiting until there's a problem, that the rector is so much involved in these other enterprises that he's given up on, weddings, funerals, baptisms, and church. Well, this is a problem. Okay, we're gonna have to address that. But don't wait for that. That the ground that you want to be on is proactive leadership. Now, quite often you'll inherit a situation. Something will happen, and you've got to respond to that issue. Obviously, you do. But the real creative work of the vestry is proactive, out in front where the situation is soft. And I think without knowing the specific, I would say in a general way that those questions should be placed a year down the road and talk about that and find out what you want to do, and then that will help you to deal with the thing that's at your doorstep. That's not always possible because the thing at your doorstep can be kind of horrible, but anyway, that's what I'm suggesting.
That's helpful. And to your point earlier, like I'm also one of the green visors on the finance committee for the diocese, and so I kind of see, not just the issues in my parish. I do see it on a couple other spots, but no, I appreciate that.
No, I think it's an issue, and whether the issue has to do with the inherent properties of the church, or the fact that in a smaller community, for example, the rector or vicar is really interested in being the chaplain to the volunteer fire department, and that's maybe taking up more time than you'd really like it to take up. Okay, you want to talk about that, again, proactively out in front. And try to stay up. So it's not just a corporate church issue. It's all across the board. So,
Frank, if I could just chime in, I do think that it's important for a vestry and rector to have clear expectations for each other.
Absolutely.
Frank talked about sort of setting the stage to encounter the living God and sort of the role of clergy and the role of vestry. I think in each parish, it's important that vestry and clergy have a regular conversation about sort of the essential tasks and responsibilities of clergy, of vestry members, and to sort of go back and review that, have mutual ministry reviews on a regular basis, whether that's annual or every other year, whatever it may be that works best for your parish.
Absolutely true. Good point. And
Okay.
Hello, this is Maxine Jones.
I'm sorry, Maxine.
Yes, room 7. I try to put something in the chat, but I don't think it's here.
I can't hear what Maxine is saying.
Yeah.
Rowan, can you help me here?
Yeah, I think so. Maxine, I'll follow up with an email. We're at the 11:30 time hour. If you would hold on.
Yeah.
I'm happy to follow up. I know we did not get to all the questions that we had, but I will follow up with all of those who did not have their questions answered. And both Frank and Andrew are willing to be available at a future time to discuss any additional concerns. I also am very grateful for the number of questions that have been posed. These will help inform the future offerings of the School for Christian Faith and Leadership. This will not be the only time that we meet to address questions of changing demographics, as well as who are we as a church in a digital world, not just digital worship, but also digital discipleship. So again, thank you so much for coming. And Canon Walter, I would like to invite you to close us. And thank you. Oh, well, before we do that, a deep gratitude to Frank Wade for hosting this event. You continue to be a gift to this diocese. We are thankful that you are bringing your expertise and your wisdom here to share with us. We're eternally grateful. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And
thank you to everyone who came today. Your ministries are vitally important to all of our parishes.
absolutely.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we give thanks for this time together this morning, for the presence of Frank Wade, for the presence of the clergy and lay leaders who have participated in this call and give so much of their time and energy to furthering your love in the world and helping to make our parishes vital beacons of your love. Send your blessing down upon us now as we go about our day, Keep all on this call and their families safe. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Rob. Thank you.